Oh, I'm sorry. Give me a second. I need to catch my breath. What an absolute roller coaster of a game. And like any good roller coaster, well, I had fun and I'm coming out of it smiling. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken, for the second year in a row, go into Detroit and defeat the Red Wings 5-4 in overtime. It's actually the third out of 3 seasons the Kraken's one trip to Detroit has resulted in overtime. They lost in the inaugural season 3-2 in the shootout, but the last 2 seasons they've won 5-4 in OT. Actually, for that matter, just a couple weeks ago, the Seahawks went to Detroit and also won in overtime. Never mind that, like the Kraken, they also blew a multi-score lead to get to overtime, but they ended up winning in the end anyway. And yes, for the heck of it, I did check, and the Mariners also went to Detroit once this season, but they didn't play any extra inning games. That doesn't really fit the narrative, though, so we're just going to pretend that never happened. So obviously, it probably goes without saying that this is a massive win for the Kraken over a team that was red hot coming into this game, having won 5 straight. So this is not the Detroit team that the Kraken played the last couple of years. This is a very good Red Wings team that looks like they're ready to make that quick turnaround that the Kraken did last season. And obviously, with Seattle's slow start to the season, pretty much any win for them is a big one at this point, but especially with this being a very hard start to the season schedule-wise outside of Nashville and St. Louis, which they only came away with 1 point between those 2 games. But getting a win on the road against a good team is something the Kraken desperately needed to try to get things turned around for their season. That having been said, though, while we certainly feel good after the game, when it comes to lineups going into the game, it's certainly not all sunshine and rainbows in Kraken land. Obviously, the record still doesn't look great even with a 2 now in the win column. But moreover, as I expected was going to be the case after seeing the hit and how he responded to it, Burakovsky is expected to miss 6 to 8 weeks with an upper body injury, which, again, I think a collarbone type of thing is what we're looking at here. But Burakovsky's absence wasn't the only difference in this Kraken lineup. For one, Decord was back in, as the Kraken really are going with a tandem of Decord and Grubauer here early on, which is a good thing for the longevity of both of them. But they also switched up things a bit with the lines, as Cartier moves up from the 4th line onto Benir's line with Eberle, the same line we saw in the playoffs as he came in to replace McCann and then proved that he was worth keeping in once McCann was back. And as a result, McCann ends up going down to the 3rd line with Tolvanen and Gord. Bjorkstrand then jumps up to the 2nd line in Burakovsky's place, and on the 4th line, Shore comes in with the Kraken yet to call up anybody else, so the only extra that the Kraken are currently carrying on the roster is Jacob Magna on the defensive end. And, well, considering they just scored 5 goals against a team that was on a 5-game winning streak with a 5-1 record in their own building to start off a road trip, I would say early returns on this line mix-up are pretty good. There is also one other thing that I feel like I have to bring up about this game before we jump into the recap, and I'm sure it's going to come up in the recap as well. I'm also glad that the Kraken won this game, otherwise this particular part of it would just sound like sour grapes, but the officiating in this game was horrendous. Really going both directions, but this could have been better officiated by 3 blind mice and Angel Hernandez. There were plenty of calls. I mean, the Kraken end up with 14 penalty minutes and the Red Wings 12. Honestly, that isn't really the problem so much as the fact that there were a lot of missed calls, and some of the calls they made were genuinely terrible. So just completely inconsistent from an officiating standpoint. And, well, the 3rd period, and especially the end of the 3rd period, turns into a total madhouse. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves, though, because before we get to that absolute mess of a 3rd period in a number of ways for the Kraken specifically, we got to go all the way back to the beginning and start with the 1st period that, once again, has become a trend for this Kraken team. They played pretty well, and I would say outplayed their opponent. Of course, the rest of games have been a bit of a challenge for them, and scoring when they're playing well has also been a challenge, which they don't do in this 1st period. But generally speaking, the Kraken really looked like the better team in the 1st frame. Not that it started that way, because in the first few seconds, Detroit wins the opening faceoff, they get into the Kraken end without too much trouble, and a couple of saves later from Joey, the second one rebounds out to the side, where Veleno has a wide open goal to shoot at, but he tries to get a little bit too fancy, tries to go bar down and in. Instead, he lifts it just a hair too much and goes bar up and out as the Kraken dodge a huge bullet and start wiping that sweat off their brows early on. Now, fortunately, after getting a bit lucky there in the opening minute, the Kraken again lock things down and play pretty well the rest of the way. There's an early scuffle in the corner behind Joey involving old Kraken Daniel Sprong as he gave Joey a little extra poke with the stick after Decord made a save. That, of course, attracted the immediate attention of Brian Dumoulin, who was not friends or teammates with Sprong last season, so he has no problem going after him. That leads to a whole fracas. Nothing comes out of that penalty-wise. And then at the other end of the ice, Beniers gets boarded, which draws no call. The start of what was clearly going to be a, like I said, iffy at best officiating night. And then following getting boarded, Beniers and Sider, the last two Calder winners in the NHL, end up getting to a bit of a fracas themselves, which ends up with both of them going to the penalty box. So a very rare appearance in the penalty box for Beniers, who now with this roughing call, which is even stranger, has already equaled his penalty minutes from last season with this first penalty of this season. And while nothing comes out of this 4-on-4 period of time on the scoreboard, it does kind of serve to even play back up and stop a little bit of momentum that the Kraken have been slowly building over the course of this period. And eventually, the Red Wings will get the first penalty of the game on a holding call against Eberle that it might have been there, but it was a pretty soft call. Fortunately, the Kraken penalty kill, which just gave up its first goal of the season with their last one in last game, has otherwise been fantastic, one of the best penalty kills in the league coming into this game, manages to shut down the best power play in the league coming into this game. So unfortunately, after another well-played first period by the Kraken, they get nothing out of it, and we go into the second, still scoreless, but don't stay there very long, as Detroit does end up winning a face-off in their end. It gets out to Daniel Sprong, who passes it across the blue line to Olimata. He one-times it at the net, and it's tipped just in front of Joey by Veleno, who does end up getting this one to go not quite bar down and in, but right into the top of the netting to kind of make up for the one he missed earlier and give Detroit that 1-0 lead. And then to make matters worse, about a minute later, the refs decide to get involved again as they send Schultz to the penalty box for a phantom interference. I mean, sure, he and one of the Detroit players got their legs tangled up in front of the Kraken net and they both went down, but that is rarely, if ever, called interference in this league. Either way, they call it interference this time. Schultz heads to the box, and fortunately, the Kraken penalty kill steps up big again. But I don't know what Schultz did to this officiating group. He's going to be on the short end of the stick again coming out of the penalty box, because as the power play comes to an end, Decord, being the incredibly fun goaltender that he is to watch, makes a pass up the boards to Schultz, setting him off on a at least partial breakaway. It would have been a breakaway if he was a bit faster, but being that he's a defenseman, he's not the fastest player in the league. He does end up getting caught up to on what otherwise probably would have been a breakaway, and right as they get up towards the net, he gets wrestled to the ice before he can get his shot off, and then ends up sliding into the boards head first, which that isn't necessarily a problem so much as him getting literally dragged to the ice by the Detroit player, and of course there's absolutely no call whatsoever. The refs decide, yeah, obviously that's not holding or interference, that's just a perfectly clean play. Somehow. Not long after, though, maybe realizing the giant mistake they had just made, the refs do end up giving the Kraken their first power play of the game on a holding call against Justin Hall, which, again, this is a pretty soft call that's made. Yeah, there's a little bit of something there, but it's a tough one, and I can understand why Red Wings fans would be upset about this one. Again, in all fairness, the terrible officiating really went both ways in this game. I mean, in this second period alone, there's a couple more calls that are going to go decidedly Seattle's way. There's a high sticking where Dumoulin hits Sprong in the nose. Sprong goes down like he's gotten shot in the face, but there's no call there. And then a little bit later, there's another call where Schwartz throws his stick at a puck and ends up breaking up what would have been a very good chance for a goal for the Red Wings, and it goes back the other way for a goal for the Kraken. We'll get there. Again, the point is this was a horrendously officiated game both ways. And I mean, I don't know if this is just what happens when you have 16 games on the same day, and maybe this is just the game that got that 16th crew that doesn't usually do NHL games. I don't know what the case was, but it was pretty hard to watch from that standpoint. But anyway, getting back to the first Kraken power play of the game, still early on in the second. Again, this is a Kraken power play that has had some well-documented struggles early on this season, and it's going against a Detroit penalty kill that is also one of the better penalty kills in the league, so just great special teams in general from this Red Wings team so far. However, the Kraken win the faceoff. It's Schwartz who wins it. Beniers gets it back to Dunn at the point. Dunn fires off a shot well wide of the net, but he's looking for the bank pass and ends up getting it to work as it goes off the end boards, off the side of the net, and right out front to who else but Jaden Schwartz, who's gone straight to the front of the net. He gets a backhand shot off and roofs it to give the Kraken their first goal of the game and tie things up at 1 with another power play goal. And who knows, maybe this power play is actually starting to turn things around as they have gotten a couple of goals recently. Largely Jaden Schwartz, so maybe he's just the key. In that case, we really have to hope he stays healthy. And happily, not only does this quick power play goal for Schwartz tie things up for the Kraken, but they're also able to build up some pretty good momentum and really dominate the middle part of this second period. Unfortunately, they're not able to score out of it, but they do end up with another power play, and this one, in all fairness, there's no complaining or real controversy about it. Ben Sherratt just loses his helmet down along the boards and then continues to play like nothing happened. And while you usually can get away with one more play of the puck after you've lost your helmet, you can't just keep playing for another 30 seconds, and the refs really tried to give Sherratt a lot of time before they do eventually blow it dead, send him to the penalty box, and the Kraken nearly score again in the first few seconds of this power play, as again they win the faceoff, get another net front scramble, and Yamamoto has a chance but just can't quite get his stick on the loose puck in the crease, so eventually Husso's able to cover it, and the Red Wings kill off the rest of that power play without too much trouble, as the Kraken power play looked somewhat hopeless until the very last couple minutes of this game, and we'll get to that. Fortunately for the Kraken, though, their power play is not what they rely on for scoring. That would be at 5-on-5. Or at least it was last season. They're still working on figuring out how to score consistently this season. Maybe this game will do it, although we kind of hoped that would be the case with the Carolina game. Either way, time will tell there. At 5-on-5, and shout out to Allison Lucan, who pointed this out before the game on the Root Sports broadcast, that the weakness that the Red Wings, even in spite of their hot start, had coming into this game was playing against the rush and giving up odd man rushes. And that definitely is what comes back to bite them here late in the second, as first, it's Jaden Schwartz on a bit of a broken 2-on-1. It kind of turns into a 2-on-2. But Schwartz shows why with these odd man rushes that the Kraken get, it's always better unless you have a clear passing lane to shoot the puck and then hope for a rebound, or heck, maybe it might even go in. And sure enough, that's what Schwartz does here, is he fires off the puck. Maybe he was looking for a rebound out to the other side to Bjorkstrand for him to finish it, but he doesn't need a rebound because that shot goes right in over the pad of Husso to give the Kraken the 2-1 lead, and Schwartz his second goal of the game, as he's already now on hat trick watch. And then shortly off the faceoff following this Kraken goal is when that play that is probably going to be the one that most Red Wings fans focus on when it comes to the terrible officiating in this game takes place, as the Red Wings get right down into the Kraken end and nearly tie things up with a quick response goal a couple of times. Their best chance coming on a cross-crease pass from one side to the other and a wide-open Red Wing on the far side that, again, would probably have had to just miss the net for this not to tie up the game. But Jaden Schwartz, who's a decent few feet away from where this pass is going, decides to just throw his stick in front of the pass and does end up getting a piece of it, breaking up that pass enough for it to go past the guy that it was headed to. That's not something you're allowed to do, but the refs decide that they're just not gonna, I don't know. I don't know if they're blind or they made the decision not to call it. Either way, it's terrible that it doesn't get called. Fortunately for the Kraken, they are able to collect themselves and then turn it into a breakaway going the other way as Larson gets to the puck. He passes it through the neutral zone, catches Cartier in stride. Cartier skates in and buries it past Husso to give the Kraken the 3-1 lead. And the unpaid officials, as Forzen likes to call them, we're happy to let the officials know just what they thought about that series of events that takes what could have been a tied game and makes it a 3-1 Kraken lead. Eventually, the remaining less than a minute does tick off the clock, and we go to the second intermission with the Kraken leading 3-1 and having really outplayed the Red Wings through these first two periods, even if that second goal might have been given a little bit of assistance by the guys in stripes. It's some late period heroics from the Kraken that get them that multi-goal lead going into the third period, where now all they have to do is not make stupid mistakes and not give the Red Wings, who are very good on the power play, too many chances to score on the power play. Sounds simple enough. Let's see how that goes. Well, a minute and 20 seconds into the third, Eberle gets caught for tripping on Larkin, and there's nothing more you can say about this one. It's a textbook trip, so Eberle goes to the box, the Kraken to the kill, and you can't test a power play that's this hot that many times and not get burned at least once. And sure enough, after a couple of chances, the Red Wings win a face-off. One pass later, it's a one-timer from Gostisbehere into the net to bring the Red Wings back to within one. Okay, so obviously not an ideal start to the third period, but you still do have a one-goal lead to work with. And as long as you can lock things down from here, play some disciplined hockey, Decord's been good again, you should be able to still come out with a win, and at very least, if the Red Wings do pick up one more late in the third, you get to overtime and at the very least, get a point out of this game, which you desperately need at this point in the season. But no, just a couple minutes later, in fact, it might have been less than a couple minutes later, it's Devon Shore in his Kraken debut, and unfortunately in limited ice time, this is the most noticeable impact he made on this game. As off a face-off, he catches, I think it was Fisher, up high with a high stick, and well, it's definitely possible that Fisher bit the inside of his lip here to draw the blood. He ends up eventually being able to produce some blood from the inside of his mouth, so it turns into a double minor. And of course, the Red Wings once again score right away on the power play. This time it comes off of a pass from high to low down to Larkin, who's red hot to start this season. I mean, Detroit's start to the season has been pretty much carried by Larkin and DeBrincat. Larkin, with that pass, has a little bit of time to pick his spot, take that shot, and puts it perfectly into the top corner. Not a ton that Decord can do here. It would have taken a pretty nice save to block it. So the Red Wings have now tied things up, and they still have 2 more minutes of power play. So 2 more minutes of Detroit power play, thanks to the carelessness of Shore with his stick, that the Kraken have to kill off. Fortunately, they do manage to kill it off, but then we go right back to 5-on-4. This time, happily, it's a Kraken power play, though, because Cartier got boarded into the corner down at the Detroit end. It was definitely textbook boarding, and this time the officials actually decided to make the call. So the Kraken now have a chance to take back the lead, which they, of course, don't do. They pretty much do nothing with this power play whatsoever. And then in the final seconds of the power play, they actually give up a shorthanded chance, which Wennberg defends pretty well, but the officials, who, I mean, at this point, you'd have to think the only people enjoying watching the Red Wings play on the power play more than their fans were the officials, because this holding call on Wennberg, even though it's basically a mirror of what happened with Schultz earlier on this game, but actually with a little bit less interference from the defender Wennberg in this case, because he doesn't wrestle the guy to the ice and slide him headfirst into the boards like what happened with Schultz earlier on in the second. Even outside of what happened with Schultz, it's a pretty borderline call against Wennberg. Either way, they send Wennberg to the box and Detroit to the power play, and of course, for the third time this period, they score on it. It takes them over halfway through the power play, and it does come off of a pretty nice passing play. Again, it's high to low and then across Decord's face from right down by the net up to the face-off dot on the far side. Decord commits a little bit too much trying to get back for the impending shot, and as he slides to open up that far side where the pass just came from, DeBrincat finds that little window and gives the Red Wings the lead. Just like that, the Kraken have managed to completely blow their 2-goal lead and are now behind. And to be perfectly honest and transparent with you, it is at this point in the game, and really over the next few minutes as not much of anything happens, that I'm starting to feel like this season is just cursed for the Kraken. They have finally 2 fantastic periods of play. They come into a third period with a multi-goal lead, and then less than halfway through the period, they've given up 3 power play goals. And suddenly the two things that had really been going well for the team so far to this point in the season, goaltending and the penalty kill, have fallen apart in the course of 10 minutes and given up that lead, and not only given up the lead, but again, given the opposing team the lead themselves, that they now have a chance to close out and prevent the Kraken from even getting 1 point out of this game. However, like I said in the beginning, this game was an absolute roller coaster from start all the way to the finish. We had the first period that was very reminiscent of everything that's happened to this point in the season. The Kraken play well, but get nothing out of it. Then suddenly a second period that doesn't look like what we've seen so far this season. I mean, the Kraken give up an early goal. That's pretty much what we've seen, but then rally back with a strong period once again to score 3 goals and take a multi-goal lead going into a third period. But then, like I just pointed out, the two strengths of the team fall apart and they blow that lead entirely. Which brings us to the final couple minutes. As with 4 minutes left, actually just under 4 minutes left in the game, and the Kraken still needing 1 just to get to overtime, Daniel Sprong once again boards Cartier into the corner. Sorry, Sprong didn't board him the first time, but Cartier gets boarded into the same corner for a second time. This time it's Sprong who does so. Sprong, being a teammate of Cartier in the playoffs, is nice enough, it looked like, as they're both sitting on the ice, to at least check that he was okay. I don't think Sprong really intended for that hit to be as bad as it looked. Cartier, thankfully, was okay. Sprong goes to the box. The Kraken do nothing on that power play, but just as that power play is coming to an end, Larkin ends up tripping McCann, and again, it's a pretty blatant trip. Detroit fans don't like it because obviously the game's on the line, and again, the officiating has been just all over the place this game, so no one really knows what to expect. They get this one right, and the Kraken don't end up getting the two-man advantage because they have the delayed power play go long enough that Sprong comes out of the box, and right as he comes out of the box, he intercepts a pass into the offensive end, which then starts the second Kraken power play. And with this now second power play here in the final minutes of the game, still down by 1, it's at around a minute and a half left. The Kraken win a face-off on the power play. They get Decord pulled into the bench so they can get a 6th guy out on the ice for a 6-on-4 opportunity, and, well, wouldn't you know it, sometimes pulling the goaltender ends up working out, as the puck goes down around the boards behind the net and up to Jared McCann on the far side from where they won that faceoff. And although it's on the opposite side of the offensive end of the opposite faceoff circle from where McCann usually likes to shoot from, he takes the shot anyway, and he puts it into the back of the net to tie the game up with just a minute and a half left, thanks in part to a beautiful screen in front by Jaden Schwartz, who doesn't end up getting a tip on it, so he doesn't get the hat trick here in regulation. But the Kraken tie things up with just over a minute left in this game, and eventually do end up killing off the rest of this clock. In fact, they very nearly score again. Cartier gets robbed right out in front, could have ended up winning this in regulation, but we do get to overtime thanks to the late game heroics of Jared McCann. And again, after all, based on the history of these Seattle-Detroit matchups in Detroit, this game was always destined for overtime. It just got a little bit too interesting there at the end, especially the way we came into that third period. Either way, we head to OT, where the Kraken have yet to win this season. They did go to the shootout the one time, which is the only time they've been in overtime yet to this point, which is actually kind of where this overtime looks like it's headed. Is really not much of anything happens in this overtime through the first 4 minutes of it. Both teams get their chances at possessing the puck and get close to taking shots, but ultimately they end up flubbing the puck off of a pass or just misplaying it and turning it over in the offensive end. That goes back and forth for a while. And eventually in the final 40 seconds, the Red Wings get into the offensive end and Raymond gets a half at least wide open look at the Kraken net. And this is a guy who only got beat out for the Calder 2 years ago by his teammate Insider. So a very good young player in Lucas Raymond. So with him again having Decord at least partially beat anyway, certainly a decent sized window to shoot at. He fires off that shot to end the game, but it goes off the inside of the post and out the other way as the Kraken dodge another massive bullet thanks to the plumbing. And as one of the new patrons over on Patreon pointed out, Chris, he said that and rightly so. The plumbing, the posts, and crossbar very well could be deserving of one of the Kraken 3 stars in this game, as it was that crossbar that saved the Kraken in the first few seconds of this game, and now it's a post that comes here to save the Kraken in the final few seconds. As right back the other way, the Kraken have an odd man rush, which they don't end up taking advantage of, or they don't get a shot off on goal, but it does send Detroit into panic mode, and that means that all three Detroit players end up going into the boards, taking out 2 Kraken players, which, as you would notice, leaves 1 Kraken player left, 1 guy taking out Dunn, 2 taking out Eberle. One of those 2 does get back as McCann now gets the puck to try to block the McCann shot. But even with that 1 Detroit player getting back into the play, with the final seconds ticking off in overtime, and again, the Kraken very much wanting to end this in overtime because of their history, their terrible history with shootouts, McCann winds up to take that shot, but then looks off the shot, passes it to Eberle, he shoots, he scores to give the Kraken the 5-4 overtime victory. A wide open Eberle, as Raymond isn't able to get back to defend the Eberle shot. It's just a bank from the McCann pass, and the Kraken, with 5 seconds left, come away with the victory. And again, a desperately needed massive win for the Kraken. Could very well even be the win that turns this season around for the team. It certainly has that feeling of a curse lifting. I mean, it's just a few games early into the season, so maybe curses are a little bit too much to be talking about, but certainly a momentum shift in the season. Hopefully they can build on it in the next few games, because this is that type of game that can get things turned around, especially after coming back to win, having blown that lead in the third period. And there's probably no better embodiment of the relief and weight being lifted off the shoulders after the horrible start to this season, that horrible first 10 minutes of this third period, than the response to this goal that Eberle and McCann have. As Eberle, who's the one that scores it and scored it from a knee, just goes to 2 knees and slides slowly along the ice, lets his arms go to the side, and looks up with, honestly, just again, massive relief on his face more than anything else. McCann throws his hands up in the air at first, and then goes over to Eberle and just gives him a kiss on the helmet as he's still on the ice, as if to say, thank you for ending that and not getting us to the shootout, where they would never admit it, but I think they're all probably not feeling great about the shootout either. Then the rest of the team comes and celebrates. It was also kind of fun to, as the goal goes in, see Dunn, who's on his back in a bit of a fracas with one of the Detroit players, just start pumping his fists from his back on the ice as the goal goes in. So just the gambit of emotions on the ice for the Kraken, and I'm sure within the fan base as that goal goes in for Eberle. And for the Kraken, who were fantastic at 3-on-3 last season, get off to a pretty good start this season. I mean, sure, they didn't score in their first opportunity in St. Louis, but they also didn't lose in overtime. They lost in the shootout, and they do win this one in overtime, which now puts them at 1-0-1 once you get to overtime, which, again, at least hopefully a good sign that once things get to overtime, the Kraken can pick up some extra points. Beyond that, I don't know what more there is to say about this game that hasn't already been said. Obviously, it goes without saying that it's a fantastic start to a road trip that the Kraken really need to come away with some points on. They'll go to Carolina next, and this is Carolina team that's still giving up a lot of goals, and the Kraken already scored 7 against them once, so hopefully they can continue that trend for the Hurricanes and score some more. We'll have to see once that game rolls around, but the Kraken come away with 2 big ones here in Detroit. So then we might as well move on to the Kraken 3 stars, which again, for the first time this season, are brought to you by the patrons of this channel, supporting a little bit more over on Patreon. If you want to be a part of helping decide these Kraken 3 stars after every Kraken game, you can help support this channel a little bit more than you already are by just watching this video, or even clicking some of those free buttons down below if you like this and want to see more of it. But yeah, if you want to support a little bit more, be a part of picking Kraken 3 stars, there's a link down below to the Patreon where you can be a part of it. And in that, we have actually a few new patrons since the last game. So a special shout out to those 3 newcomers, Areli Oliveris, Michael Kievershin, and Christopher Hagee. And sorry if I got any of those pronunciations wrong. I did my best. Feel free to correct me with, I guess, phonetic spelling if you can do that down in the comments. Otherwise, thank you very much to you 3, as well as the existing ones, Nancy J and Mary Kuzman as well. Now, obviously, I don't think anybody needed any help to figure out that the first star of this game is clearly Jaden Schwartz, not only getting the first 2 goals of the game for the Kraken, but also he won the faceoff that made that first goal happen in the first place, and then was the key screen for the game tying goal there at the end. So an incredible game for Jaden Schwartz. Then with the second star, I'm going to be going with Jordan Eberle here. Now, obviously, he gets the overtime winner, which certainly doesn't hurt his case at getting the second star. But even outside of that, I would say this was his best game of the season so far. In fact, I don't think that's a stretch at all. It might be by far his best game of the season to this point. In fact, that whole first line really looked like a first line for the Kraken for the first time this season. Fortunately, it's taken this long to get there, and I don't necessarily think that has anything to do with McCann leaving that line, or even necessarily Cartier coming onto it, although Cartier had a fantastic game and definitely looked like he belonged with them. But for whatever reason, that line really had some good chemistry going this game and created a number of very good chances, even if the only one they actually got to go, and it wasn't even them, was Eberle's in overtime. And then for the third star in this game, although I'm sure the goaltenders out there will be disappointed in me, I'm not going to go with the plumbing, the posts and crossbar that saved the Kraken twice in this game. Decord also had a few pretty good saves himself, but the tough third period, even if all 3 were on the power play, I think kind of robs him of one of the 3 stars here. Instead, I'm going to go with Ty Cartier, who stepped into that first line role, not for the first time this season. The Kraken have been kind of mixing up these lines in games throughout the last few games, especially to try and get things going. This was the first time we saw them come into a game with all 4 lines looking different from how they started the season. Cartier, with that full game and full first line minutes, really took made the most of it. He had, again, the chance to end it in regulation there at the very end, but also got that breakaway goal earlier on, drew the 2 penalties, and generally was just all over this ice all over the ice in this game, making a difference. So a fantastic game from Cartier. Again, that makes it Schwartz first star, Eberle second, and Cartier third, with plenty of other people that I think you could point out as having very good games in this one for the Kraken. And I'd love to know what you think about some other potentials down in the comment section below. I mean, in general, just feel free to use that comment section as a place to party and let out some of the relief at having finally watched the Kraken win and beat a good team. Other than that, though, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are free ways to let me know about that down below to help support the channel. And as always, again, if you do want to help support the channel a little bit more and be a part of the Kraken 3 stars, as well as some other things involved over on Patreon, there's a link down below for that. And until next time, the second game already against the Carolina Hurricanes in a couple of nights. Stay safe out there. Be good to each other. God bless, and go Kraken!